Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Devil's Due, which is episode 13 of season 4 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation one episode at a time. In this video I cover the 4th season episode Devil's Due. So Devil's Due is the episode where the Enterprise goes to a planet where a Federation science team is held captive because there's mass hysteria on the planet because everyone's convinced that myth where apparently 1,000 years ago the people of the planet sold their soul to the devil and got 1,000 years of prosperity. In exchange, the devil was supposed to return and take over the planet, and a lot of the signs such as earthquakes were showing, so everyone was convinced that was happening, and Picard gets there and tries to convince them that that's ridiculous. However, the devil does in fact show up. Someone named Audra, who is a really quirky woman who is convinced that the planet is hers and flirts hard out with Picard, who is not having any of it. And she seems to have magical powers such as being able to disappear and make people disappear and cause earthquakes. And the Enterprise crew are wondering if she's a powerful being like Q. But Picard discounts that and says that's most likely just a con artist, so he becomes determined to defeat her, especially when she claims that she now owns the Enterprise since it was in orbit of the planet when she took it over. So Picard convenes an arbitration hearing that Data, being the most impartial person they can find, resides over. And when it looks like Picard is going to lose this hearing, LaForge thankfully saves him by finding her cloaked ship where she was performing all of these tricks from, and they take it over, and then Picard reproduces the tricks that she was doing to convince the people of the planet that she is not Ardra and is in fact just a con artist. So as she tries to slip away, the people of the planet arrest her and thank Picard for saving them. Picard says, as I tried to tell you, you saved yourselves. So, Devil's Due. This is a strange episode for me. So in my revisited for Future Imperfect, I talked about how Future Imperfect was the episode of Star Trek I've seen the most, that I was like most sick of, and I've seen it the most. And I talked to I've watched other videos, other reviews, and other podcasts on Star Trek, and everyone has like a different episode. In fact, most people, is ironic, their episodes in like season 3, but for me season 3 was like the white whale that took me forever to see. For me, season 4 was the season that they played over and over again. And so everyone has an episode that they've seen the most through reruns. Well, not everyone. A lot of people do, especially those who are watching it in syndication in the 90s. So a lot of people have an episode that they're most sick of, that they've just seen repeated over and over again, that the syndication channels would show for some reason all the time. And as I said, for me, the one I've seen the most was Future Imperfect. But that actually had a lot to do with the fact that I used to love that episode when I first got into Star Trek. So I would watch it. I would I taped it off the TV and had it on VHS, and I would watch it repeatedly. The episode that I'm next sick of, the one I think the syndication channel would show over and over and over again, would be this one, Devil's Due. In fact, I have a very distinct memory of when I was younger, and I heard of all these episodes in season 3 that I never got to see, such as Yesterday's Enterprise and Offspring, Sins of the Father, and Deja Q, and I would tune in every week hoping to see one of these episodes I never saw before. And I have a distinct memory of tuning in and seeing the start of this episode with Data doing the Ebenezer Scrooge thing and being like, God damn it, how many fucking times do they have to show this goddamn episode? And being so pissed off. Like, I had seen this episode so many times, and the stupid Data Scrooge thing, I was so fucking sick of it. And I was just so upset. I was like, why can't they ever fucking show the episodes I haven't seen yet? But the funny thing about it is, because of the fact that I was so sick of this episode as a teenager, I avoided it as an adult. So for the past 20 years, it's probably one of the episodes I've seen the least. Like, I think the only times I'd watched this is when I did a full rewatch of the entire show, which I did one when I first bought the DVDs back in the 2000s, like 2008 or something like that. And then again, just a couple years ago when I did my season-long reviews for Star Trek. So it's odd because I used to be so sick of... Oh, there was also a time when I showed this to my ex-wife when we first met, and I was getting her into Star Trek. That would have been like the early 2000s, like 2000, 2001. But anyway, like, yeah, I can count like how many times I've watched this in the past 25 years, which is most Star Trek episodes I've seen so many times I couldn't even count it. But this one I avoided because I was so sick of it. So it has a strange effect, though, of even though I have this very distinct memory of being so sick of this episode, it's probably, as I'm going through and rewatching every episode, it's the one that I remember the least, or at least that is least familiar to me, or at least with Next Generation episodes, because I've avoided it so hard out in the past couple of decades. So it went from being so sick of it to now seeming kind of novel and kind of fresh compared to the other episodes. But, you know, but it is hard to sort of judge how I feel about this episode because it was one of the first episodes that I saw. Alright, doing some research on this episode, and this is something I've known for quite some time. It's not that I just found this out, and it's pretty common knowledge. I'm sure most of you watching this video probably know this. This video was originally a script written for Star Trek Phase 2. The proposed show that was going to bring Kirk and crew back to back to the TV in the late 70s, until that idea was scrapped in favor of doing the motion picture. Now, in retrospect, I think that was a mistake, but then again, we got Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan plus Next Generation out of doing it, so it's kind of probably better that worked better that way. But comparing like a TV show to the motion picture was a failure. It was a mistake. But anyway, so they had already started pre-production for Phase 2 before it got scrapped in favor of the motion picture. In fact, many of the sets and costumings were used for the motion picture, but they had already cast some of the actors, and some of them had to be, who were supposed to play main characters on the show, had to play bit parts in the movie instead. And they had written some scripts. Now, I talked about this before because the other example, this is one out of two, or I should say 2 out of 2 episodes in Next Generation that were based on Phase 2 scripts. The other one was The Child, which I covered already, and that episode was abysmal, horrendous, and this is the other one. So these were both originally supposed to be part of Phase 2, and apparently this story idea was included in Roddenberry's original pitch for the original series all the way back in the 60s when he was pitching this to the networks. This idea of the devil was one of the ideas he had, and he decided to bring that idea back for Phase 2, and then Michael Piller decided to bring it back for Next Gen. Now, apparently, if you look at the writing credits, it's ridiculously long, and this is something I was wondering, because why they chose to adapt a Phase 2 script with the child made a lot of sense to me, because Season 2 was made right after the writer's strike, and were very sort of rushed and really didn't have any scripts, and they were trying very hard to, find scripts and find ideas that were ready to go. And so it makes total sense that they would adapt a Phase 2 script. But Season 4, as I covered before, is the first season of Next Generation where they were actually sitting comfortably in the writer's room, because the first 2 seasons were chaos with tons of infighting, especially Season 2. They were really behind because of the strike. Season 3, they were still behind because of, the new showrunner they hired got fired or quit after a month, and they were still behind from Season 2, so they were constantly writing scripts very, very fast and always in a rush and always in a hurry in Season 3. In Season 4, very notably, by anyone who worked with, Michael Piller, Rick Berman, Gene Roddenberry, anyone involved would say that Season 4 was the first season where they actually were not rushed. There wasn't chaos behind the scenes. Everyone actually got along well. It was the first smooth sailing season in the writer's room for Next Generation. So knowing that, it seemed weird that Devil's Due, that this Phase 2 idea was adapted in Season 4. It seemed like in Season 4 they were sitting pretty, so they wouldn't have the need to go back and adapt a Phase 2 script, whereas in Season 2 and 3, they may certainly would. So I went and did some research on that, and by research I just mean reading Memory Alpha. It's not very deep research, but anyway, I looked into it, and apparently this script idea was revised in Season 3, which makes sense because, as I said, Season 3 they were very hard up for ideas because they were very far behind. They were writing scripts, the deadlines, and they were very rushed, and everyone behind the scenes called it very hectic to try to get out scripts on time. So it makes sense they would look to a Phase 2 script. And so apparently Melinda Snodgrass had adapted a script. It adapted a version of Devil's Due in Season 3, but Michael Piller thought it wasn't quite working, and they just couldn't get it out, so they kind of abandoned the idea for other scripts that were more along in the process and easier to write. And so he assigned, I can't remember the fellow's name, but he assigned a gentleman to write or rework the script in the hiatus between Seasons 3 and 4, because Michael Piller liked the idea of Devil's Due and thought it was a fun, interesting idea, but thought that the script still needed a lot of work. So this is something he had someone do between the hiatus, and apparently the script this person came up with was hilarious, as Michael Piller describes it, and some people thought it was too funny in that it was too goofy for Star Trek and didn't fit with what the Next Generation, the tone of the Next Generation, even though Michael Piller loved it, he was kind of overruled, and so decided to rework the script even further. And so a couple more people had it, and then another person had a hand at it, and Michael Piller himself rewrote some of it, and so it was worked on again until finally they were happy enough with this version where they finally decided to film it. Now, through most of those ideas, the main character, the devil figure, who wasn't called Audra at the time, she had a different name, and in fact it wasn't a she, there was a male character throughout most of the iterations, Roddenberry's original idea, through Phase 2, through most of even the Next Generation versions, like Melinda Snodgrass's draft and many of the other drafts, including the funny one that apparently Michael Piller thought was hilarious. The character was always male, but they said once that, and I believe it was Livingston who said this, is that once they finally made the decision to make the character woman, that's when everything fell into place. That's when they're like, now the script is working. And so that's when they thought the script finally fell into place and decided to film it. Now, a lot of people, reviews and people I've heard talking about this episode, bring up the fact that it comes off like an original series episode. And I agree and disagree with that, because I think that the idea, like, is an original series idea for sure, but it's not like, so at no point as I was watching this repeatedly over and over and over again as a teenager, and then the few times I watched this as an adult, at no point did I think, oh well, this is just an original series episode disguised as the Next Generation episode. Which there were some episodes in season 1 of Next Gen that I did feel that way about, but of course the shitty production and shitty music and everything in season 1 probably contributed to that feeling, if I'm being honest. But I never had that feeling about this episode until I learned that it was in fact a Phase 2 script, and once I was looking for the original series connection, I was like, oh no, I can see that. I can definitely see how this is the original series connection. But it's like, I only knew that because I had that knowledge of it being based off a Phase 2 script. If I never had that knowledge, I never would have noticed the connection. I don't think it's because I was looking for a connection is why I found one. Well, that's what I think. And if other people think that no, the connection to the original series is very, very obvious, slaps you in the face, then I'm not going to dispute them. That's fine if they had that reaction. That's just not the reaction I had. But yeah, so the idea does seem like an original series idea. So having like a con man, a con artist, try to swindle people with his bag of magic trick kind of reminds me of an animated episode. Like, and plus, I'm thinking of the Magics of Magus 2, whatever, I think is the worst episode of the animated series, because that has to do with the devil. But also, like, Harry Mudd, it invokes, like, Harry Mudd, the whole thing about a cheesy con artist going, I could just imagine if they did this in the original series, like, it's like this fat, like, Cyrano Jones or Harry Mudd type going, oh, Captain, I'm the devil, and how terrible that would have been. So when I think of the idea of it, I think of, the original series. And it's funny because a lot of people bring up how this chick was totally, crushing on Picard the whole time. They're like, oh yeah, I could see her doing that for Kirk. But mind you, that was never the idea for the original series. This whole crushing on Picard thing was one of the later drafts that was actually written during season 4 of Next Gen. So it was never the idea to have a woman crushing on the captain. And having, they had, instead of having Data as the arbiter, of course, because Data wasn't invented yet, it was the Enterprise computer, which, that sounds horrible. It's much better, much more interesting to have it be Data. And I've heard, other people speculate, why didn't they have Spock be the arbiter? But if you recall, Phase 2 didn't have Spock because Leonard Nimoy refused to come back for Phase 2, and they were going to create a new character of Zahn, who was more like the Data-esque character because he aspired to be more human, but he was a Vulcan. But yeah, so I don't know if they could have had Zahn in that role, I suppose, but maybe that would have been better than the Enterprise computer. Anyway, so yeah, when I look at it that way, I can see there's definitely the concept of this planet thinks the devil's going to come back, and there's a con artist taking available and taking advantage of that. I can definitely see that as an original series concept, but I think they did a really, really good job of adapting it to Next Generation. In other words, this episode feels to me, even though the concept feels a bit original series is, the execution and the dialogue and the minutia and the way characters interact with each other feels very in tune with Next Generation. Particularly, people that were saying, "Oh, Picard being all bitchy and his interactions with Audra remind me of Kirk." As I said, it wasn't supposed to be a woman, and plus, I don't think he's acting like Kirk in this episode. Like, some people thought, oh, the way he figured it out and he was determined to prove her wrong and he did all those tricks at the end was very Kirk-like. I disagree. I think Picard always has that. I think it's more Picard-like, actually, because I think Picard always had that attitude of figuring things out with his mind and being able to see things that maybe other people weren't seeing, being able to see through people's bullshit. We've seen this a lot with Q, and I think the episode The Survivors, one of my favorite TNG episodes, that proved that Picard was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else and could figure shit out and see shit that other people couldn't see. So for me, his behavior in this episode is very in keeping with his character, and plus the way that he's really pissy and has no time for Audra's nonsense, and the fact that she's constantly flirting with him. Well, just in general, the fact that he has no time for her nonsense and that he just sees her as a nuisance is very reminiscent to his relationship with Q. So I think I totally see Picard in this role. And all the other roles, like the way that the people on the planet are behaving, the scientists, and the supporting characters, such as having Data as the Arbiter and stuff like that, it all falls in line with Next Gen for me. So in other words, I can see the origins of this script coming from a TOS origin, but I think they did a really thorough and very good job at making it a Next Generation script rather than the original series script. It feels, all the details and the character interactions and everything like that feels more like Next Gen to me than it does the original series. And that's why I think I would have never noticed that it was supposed to be original series script until someone pointed it out. Because I think arguably there are other episodes of not just Next Gen, but also Deep Space Nine and Voyager, or Enterprise, especially Enterprise, where if you think about it, you'd be like, yeah, I can see this being an original series idea, but it wasn't. They just thought of it then, and even though the idea seems original series-esque, the actual execution and how the characters behave fit so well with that show, and I would put this episode along with that. So I would disagree with others who say that this feels a lot like the original series episode, and I would humbly suggest that perhaps they're letting the knowledge that this was a Phase 2 script sort of influence their perspective on how similar this is to the original series. But I could be wrong. That's just my opinion. This is my perspective, because I feel like this feels more like a Next Generation episode. In fact, I was going to bring up the Voyager episode Remember from Season 3. It's the Voyager episode where B'Elanna receives memory from these visiting aliens, and they're trying to warn her about this Holocaust that took place, that these aliens are trying to the genocide, basically, that these aliens are trying to, repress and cover up and pretend like never happened, where they're guilty of it. That was originally a Next Generation script. And it happened in Voyager Season 3 had a similar situation where they were rushed and they didn't have any script ideas, and that's obvious, and that's why Season 3 of Voyager sucks. And they were desperate for script ideas, so they went back and used this finished script from Next Generation and just adapted it to Voyager. Now, the reason why I bring it up is because that you can tell is a next, like, instantly, and I can tell it's from like season 5 or season 6 of Next Generation. I think season 5 more. Apparently, they didn't use it because they thought it was too much of a Holocaust story, and Schindler's List had just come out, which I think is dumb because I think it's nothing like Schindler's List. I think, and it doesn't. It seems more of an analogy on propaganda and indoctrination more than mainly the power of propaganda more than it does about a Holocaust. So I think that was dumb. They should have actually showed it in Next Gen. But point is, I can totally tell when watching that. Like, I didn't need to be told this was a Next Gen script originally, because as soon as I watched it, I'm like, this feels more like a Next Gen script. Particularly the way they had these visiting aliens who were like showing off and doing these. They were sitting in the in the what's it called, mess hall, and they were like having people's memories and showing them, like, this is just like that episode of the Violations episode in season 5 where they had these visiting aliens helping Keiko remember her shit, and I was like, this is just like that. And plus, they just did that a lot in season 5 and 6, where they had visiting aliens who would hang out, and they'd never really done anything like that in Voyager. So as soon as it happened, it's like, this feels way more like Next Gen than Voyager. And my main point is, I think that feels more like, that's more obvious that they took a script from another show and adapted it, because they didn't do a particularly good job at changing it up. Where here, I can't tell as much. I can only tell because I know, I heard behind the scenes that this was a Phase 2 script. If I never heard that, I would have never noticed, because I think they did an amazing job of adapting it, at least a much better job than Voyager did with Remember, of changing it to fit their show more specifically. Anyway, yeah, the whole Scrooge thing at the start was kind of interesting. It's kind of the carrying on from Data doing his acting thing that we saw in The Defector, and then we saw Picard, talking about, acting and how Data's trying to explore his humanity through acting. I think that worked. I'm glad they followed up on The Defector. I would say that they never do this Data in the holodeck acting where Picard's in there watching. Instead, Data will start actually acting in plays that Dr. Crusher puts on, so it's a progression. But we never get these like conversations with Picard and Data talking about exploring his humanity through acting again. At least not to my recollection. And I liked it. I think it really worked. Yeah, I've heard a lot of people wonder why there's the writers on was it Mintax 2, whatever the name of this planet is, that why they take the Federation scientists hostage, and I think the only answer for that is so the episode can happen to create tension, to create a purpose for Picard to go to the planet, I guess. I mean, doesn't really, if they're just afraid of Audra but they're convinced she's coming, like, why take hostage? Like, what would they possibly hope to accomplish? Anyway, I forgot to look this up, but the map painting that was used in this episode for, this planet, whatever it's called, I think that's the same exact map painting used in Year of Hell. And I think it was just, like, altered slightly. I'm sure, like, Star Trek has reused map paintings a lot, but this one in particular I noticed, and maybe they used it in other episodes too. But yeah, at the first opening scene of Year of Hell, the cold open, it shows this map painting of a planet, and then you see Anorex's time ship come and then they erase it from history and like wipe it out. I think it's the same map painting here. They just altered it slightly to make it look slightly different, but I'm pretty sure it's the same map painting. But anyway, it's a good matte painting. So I would definitely see why they would reuse it. It's good. Anyway, I didn't like Audra. I think she's what kind of tanked the episode for me. So I think her obsession with Picard and constantly flirting with her did seem a bit contrived and just there to sort of add spice to the episode or whatever, and I don't know. I didn't quite like it. Now I've heard a lot of people bring up the fact that when Audra's trying to seduce Picard, she takes on the form of Counselor Troy, and a lot of people know, well, if she wanted to get Picard, she should have took the form of Beverly Crusher. But I actually think that's a nice detail. That's a nice subtle detail indicating how she's just a con artist. Because if she was an omniscient being like Q or something who could actually read his mind or who would know everything, then yeah, she would take the form of Dr. Crusher, but she's not. She's just a con artist, and she wouldn't know any better. In fact, to my knowledge, she didn't even meet Dr. Crusher, and so she wouldn't know this, and so would just, take the form of Troy. And the fact she chose to take the form of Troy, someone that Picard doesn't really have any attraction to whatsoever, actually is a really clever, subtle way of indicating that she doesn't know what the fuck she's doing, and she's just making it up as she goes, that she's just conning. So I actually like that touch. I think that's an interesting touch. But yeah, as for the character herself and how she decided to do the arbitration just so that she could get into Picard's pants or make him her sex slave, that was a bit ridiculous. Like, she's risking everything. I guess, I don't know. I could see it making sense, though, because maybe she got too cocky. Maybe she thought she got too confident, and it's like, oh yeah, Picard's never going to be able to prove that, I'm a con artist. And I think this episode might have actually benefited from a scene with her crew, who we never actually see in the episode. But it would have been interesting to see a scene with her and her crew where her crew was being like, look, don't freaking, do this arbitration thing because you might lose. And her being like, no, don't worry about it. You worry too much. I'm going to, get Picard in my finger and blah, blah, blah. And for that matter, a lot of people pointed out it's kind of a dumb move on her part to try to seize control of the Enterprise. I mean, she should know that the vast Federation and Starfleet is a huge organization that she shouldn't try to fuck with, and that really that was her downfall. And I think it was in fact a really dumb move. So in order for this to make sense, you had to sort of portray her as someone who's not very bright and who's overconfident. And so if they had a scene with her crew, and her crew being like smart and warning her like, don't fuck with Starfleet, like, we have a perfect thing here, we have control of an entire planet, why are you going to put that at risk just for one starship? And her being like, you worry too much, Starfleet is not going to do anything about it, that's fine, if we have this flagship of the Federation, we have all this power, think of how much power we have. It's kind of like someone who sees like a chance for millions of dollars or riches, and so they kind of leave common sense behind because they're so like focused. Oh, don't you see, if we play our cards right, we can have this and that, and not being happy with what they do have. Kind of like a gambler, who bets all of his money and loses all of his money and not be happy with what he gained so far because he can see that you're getting more and he wants more. So I could see, so it could make sense, but I think it would have been better if the episode actually made that more clear. And as I said, if we actually got a scene of her talking to her crew that made that more clear that she was being too cocky and risking it all. But of course, if we saw her with her crew, that would give away before Picard reveals it that she's a con artist. But come on. We all knew that. Like, even Picard knew that from the very beginning. He's like, you're nothing but a flim-flam. A flim-flam artist. I think that's what he called Q earlier as well, on hiding Q. But anyway, we knew that because Picard knew that from the beginning. Audience knew that from the beginning, because we're with Picard. We trust Picard. If he's convinced she's a con artist, then we're convinced she's a con artist. So you don't need to act like it's a huge reveal, because it's not. So I think they could have very easily showed her with her crew. It would have fleshed her out more and made it more believable that she would make such a dumb move to try to take the Enterprise, because really that's where she failed. If her eyes weren't so big, if she was happy with control of an entire fucking planet, like controlling an entire planet and all of its resources and all of its finances, which is a fucking lot, if she just left good enough alone and be like, okay, Picard, you can go on your way. In fact, she should have ordered him to leave, and as the official head of state, he would have to obey. In fact, she could bring that up, like, you're in Starfleet, you can't interfere with the internal workings of this planet. And even if Picard didn't recognize her, the actual head of state does recognize her. So if Picard went to him, he would be like, look, I'm not in charge anymore. Talk to her. She's officially in charge. So by their own internal governing, their own internal politics, she is officially in control of the planet. And so if she, as the official head of state, made a statement, you need to get the fuck out of here, he would be forced to do so. Now, I could see Picard coming up with some clever scheme and plan to try to work around that, maybe like pretend like they were leaving, but actually work to uncover her bullshit. Sure, but that would have been harder for him. Like, she made it too easy. But by trying to take over the Enterprise, then that makes him a fuck ton more motivated to prove her wrong. Because he's trying to steal her ship. So of course he's going to do anything in his power to stop her. And so that's inviting failure. That's poking the sleeping dog. Like, don't fuck with that. Like, just be happy. And I've heard some other people say they find this unrealistic and that she would never be this stupid. But as I said, like, I could see a scenario where she got too cocky. But I think it would have been better if they actually showed that to us. Because that, by all accounts, that's why she failed. It was because her eyes got too big and she got too damn ambitious and tried to steal the Enterprise, which, yeah, she should have known that would never work, and that just motivates Picard. I've heard some people complain, saying that Picard should have respected the Prime Directive even as is and not interfered with, the trying to prove her wrong, but he was involved because she was trying to take his ship, and she said that the Enterprise belonged to her, so he had to interfere because it directly affected him and his crew. And so, yeah, had she not done that, she could have been like, well, Prime Directive, get the fuck out of here. And maybe Picard would have respected the Prime Directive. There's times where he violated it before, but he would be in a much more precarious position. Plus, he would not be as motivated to prove her wrong if she didn't try to claim the Enterprise. So, yeah, so that was easily her downfall. Now let's talk about Feklar. By the way, I've heard some people... One person said they loved the design on Feklar and how it looked really scary. Feklar is the Klingon devil, by the way. And other people saying that, it looks stupid and shitty. I'm on the side with the people who say it looked really good. I liked it. I think it. Now when she did the devil thing, that looked cheesy. That looked kind of dumb. But Feklar actually looked pretty convincing, pretty scary. Now, there's a line in the original series, I think it's Dave the Dove, where Kirk is talking to King. Kirk says to King, oh, King asks him to bring them up to the Enterprise, whatever, and Kirk says, "Go to the devil." And King says, "We have no devil, Captain." And this episode contradicts that. And I saw in Memory Alpha someone said, "Oh, they said this is Feklar as the Klingon devil, but obviously it's not because Klingons don't have a devil." Which, nice try, but no, this episode's actually retconning in Day of the Dev. It's just a random piece of dialogue because it's very obvious that Feklar is the Klingon devil. And Worf, because she says Feklar, who follows the souls and whatever to Grethor, and Worf's like, "You are not Feklar," making it very clear that Worf is confirming there is in fact a Klingon devil called Feklar. So maybe it's slightly different than devil, and that's why Kang was sort of speaking out of turn. Maybe Kang didn't understand exactly what the myth of the devil was. And humans, it's weird to say human society because it's really Christian society, but I guess there's different forms of the devil in different religions. But anyway, let's just say human society, that Kang didn't fully understand that and thought, oh, well, we don't have a devil, because he didn't think that Feklar was the same. But in actual fact, Feklar is essentially the same thing. But that's very nifty headcanon. On my part, I'm really doing some mental gymnastics to try to make this work. The actual reason is whoever wrote this episode didn't remember that line from Day of the Dove. That's all there is to it. The episode, which I believe was written by Ronald D. Moore, and Voyager, as one of 2 episodes that he wrote. What's it called? It's not Day of the Dead. It's Path of the Dead. Was it something? I don't know. It's the one where B'Elanna dies and has a vision of going to Grethor, in the barge of the dead. That's what it's fucking called. I knew it was something like that. Anyway, Barge of the Dead, where she goes in the barge that's taking her to Grethor. And I think they even mentioned something about like the rivers going to the thing of Grethor in this episode. So that episode was totally based off of this one line in this episode. I don't know if they specifically mentioned Grethor in that episode. I mean, Feklar. But I'm sure they did. But funny that Grethor looked exactly like all the established sets on Voyager. What a coincidence. Anyway, but that's a Voyager thing. But I thought this episode was kind of amusing. I particularly liked the scenes where in the trial when Data was acting as the arbiter, and he was trying to remain completely objective, and I love that. And how he was like Picard, I can't remember, but Picard said something, and Audra objected by saying, "Oh, he's drawing conclusions." And Data's like, "I will draw my own conclusions if you do not mind, sir." He stopped, thought about it, paused, like, "Sir." I don't know, I just like that. That's just kind of funny. And then later when Audra was doing all her tricks and making Picard disappear, and Data was just like calmly like, "The Arbiter will refrain from making her opponent disappear. The Arbiter will refrain from turning into the Klingon devil." I don't know, there's something about that I think the comedic timing actually works, and I've really liked. But of course, really satisfying. It was a really satisfying conclusion when Picard stole her abilities when the Enterprise took control of her cloaked ship and executed all the same magic tricks that she was executing. And he was like, and I love it. Like, it was such a great scene where he says to the dude, what is that dude's name? Anyway, the leader of that planet, he was like, "Oh, what if I told you I could steal Ardra's powers?" And he was like, "Come on, Picard, you are not Ardra." He's like, "Oh yeah, well, I can make earthquakes happen." And I love how he did the snap. I can see that, like, in character, he was like imitating Q. I bet you he was just like, he can see Q doing it. It's like, I finally get to be Q. And he goes, snaps, and he's enjoying it. He's enjoying every second of it. And he brings the earthquakes, and he makes Audra disappear. And she's like, oh, all the impudence. And then he turns into Feklar. It's like, impudence is pretending to be Feklar. like, that was great. Now, I've heard some people sort of criticize this, saying, oh, Picard just had to show off and do all the tricks instead of just exposing her. But he wasn't doing it just to have fun and to show off. Like, this was the only way the people of the planet, you know, and that leader, whatever, would accept that Audra's a fraud. If he just said, oh, Audra's a fraud, we have this ship, he's going to be like, nah, yeah, this is bullshit, you know? And that's like earlier in the episode where she was challenging Picard flat out. Can you explain how I'm doing all these things? Now, Picard has theories, even at that early stage in the episode, that she was using transporters and holographic trickery, but he didn't know specifically how. And he couldn't fully, so that's why he said no, because if he had said, oh yeah, well, I know that you're using transporters and holograph technology, I just don't know how, that would not be anywhere near good enough for the people, and they would just dismiss it out of hand, being like, Picard, you're being dumb. So Picard had to specifically show them, like steal her powers and use it to show, to prove. It's like kind of the whole thing from Ensigns of Command about actions speaking louder than words. He can't just say she's a fraud. He has to demonstrate it under no uncertain terms that she's a fraud. And so I thought that was brilliant. I thought that really worked for the episode. So another thing that I just have to mention is the scene where Picard is talking about the environmental changes and how Audra didn't actually do anything to make the changes, that the Ventaxians did all the changes themselves, and he holds up his hand and he's like, did she even pick up a piece of trash? Which I love that scene. But anyway, it led to one of my all-time favorite memes. Which, to be fair, is not super popular. It's certainly not as popular as the, Picard facepalm or outstretch his arm saying, why the fuck, or whatever. But I personally like it better. It's one of my favorite Star Trek memes. And that is, it has that screenshot of Picard when he holds up his fingers being a piece of trash, but they sort of Photoshop out one of his fingers, so he's just holding up his middle finger. So basically, he has this look on his face too, where he was like, it looks like he's going, and like giving the middle finger. And God, I love that. I must admit, I used that in post before. I mean, kind of jokingly, kind of in a lighthearted manner, not to like be a dick to someone, but to kind of jiving, the way Data says you lunkhead or whatever. Particularly when if someone gives me shit about being a nerd for watching Star Trek, then I'll just post that picture of Picard going, middle finger. So that's something I always think about when I watch this episode too. So, now's the time I would like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'm very humbled, very thankful for everyone's support. So I'll give a shout out. Very special thanks to Brandon Nealhouse for all your support. Thank you so much for being a strong supporter of the channel. And I'll also give a shout out to Antarius, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Manny Jester, Joel Valls, Alessandro Michelaccio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So, we do have a few patron comments on this episode. First comment is from Brandon Neal Howells, who says, "This is very reminiscent of Isaac Asimov's short story Nightfall, except that was infinitely better. I find it very hard not to laugh at Audra's clothes and even sillier hairstyle. Sweet Jesus, how many godlike entities are there in the universe? I'm waiting for the fan fiction where Audra meets Q." The Ventaxians agreeing to sell themselves into perpetual slavery after a millennium seems like a very short-sighted act. I enjoyed watching the episode more than I expected, but it is a very tired premise which only partly redeemed by Audra's gleefully over-the-top acting. Data's portrayal of Ebenezer Scrooge plus Picard and Data's sometimes hilarious courtroom scenes. Let's see. Audra trying to seduce Picard was just annoying and stupid. Why did Audra assume the form of Troy? Everybody knows Picard fancies Beverly Crusher. 5 Klingon handymen. WTF. Out of 10. What's this Klingon handyman? I don't know what that. Anyway, she's not a godlike creature, though. She's just a con artist who shows off all her powers or uses holograms and transporters. So Ardra Q would laugh in the face of Ardra. She's small fries. Yeah, and that's why she didn't know it was Beverly Crusher he fancies, because she doesn't know. She's just a lousy con artist. Also, like I was going to mention the Voyager episode, Live Fast and Prosper, which also dealt with con men and like con artists. And I think this is a better episode than that one, if I'm being honest. That one is just too silly and too ridiculous, where this one is definitely way more interesting. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buchwald, who says, I've always enjoyed this episode. Yes, it's obviously written for the original TOS crew. It was a Phase 2 script, but how the rewrite helps Data seems almost human to the Flim Flam artist is perfect. Yes, apparently the devil in the 90s has 80s hair, but the actress performance is great, and her trying to lure Picard in a sexual interest was much more amusing than it ever would have been with Kirk. So there's a lot here. Yes, where did the ensign go during the couple moments he disappeared when she took his place? And there's a few other nitpicks, but I almost overlooked them as it tells an enjoyable story. And unlike The Child, this is a good rewrite, which I guess says something when a writer's strike isn't happening. Yeah, this is one of those anti-technology races which I always wonder if I can't fully buy. Yes, that includes the Baku and Insurrection, but when the focus is on Picard and Data, how Picard lets the leader know how they should be good to themselves for their accomplishments, it was very Trekkian and good. And I love the smirk / amusement on Data's face when he finally sees clearly the ruse. Yes, it's great. I used to give it 8, but I will now bump this one up to 9 blinks of the eye magic out of 10. Wow, that's pretty high praise. The anti-technology thing, I don't think they're not. I didn't get the impression they didn't go as far back as the Baku, because the Baku tried to live like very, very simple lives, almost like, I don't know, I was gonna say like 16th century maybe, whereas like these aliens I think are more advanced than I would think even modern day. They just get the impression that they used to be like just as advanced as the Federation, and had they kept going, they could have been even more advanced than Starfleet, but they decided not to, and they decided to stagnate, and because it was destroying their planet. But to me, it still looks like their technology is still on par with Starfleet's, but I could be wrong. Man, I'm just going off that matte painting, really. And there was yeah, in that room, it didn't look like, you know, medieval or whatever, like the Baku. But so yeah, that didn't bother me at all. The fact that they were stagnant and didn't want to advance technologically wise, I think that makes a lot of sense. I heard some people arguing with, oh, if they're agrarian and not industrial, how do they have all these things? Well, you don't have to be industrial and pollute your planet to be advanced. Like, there's other ways around that, but I'm not going to get into that. Anyway, next comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Devils do more like total poo. Actually, I like this episode and don't think it's booty crap at all. Alright, so that's a good pun. Total poo, that's a good one. I commend you for that. I think that's one of your better ones. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, this was William Douglas Lanford's last written credit, and Philip sorry, I can't pronounce that name, Lazabrink wrote 2 more scripts in the Trek franchise, Darmok and The Brilliant Fascination. Sorry, I can't stop laughing at how I wrote that. Since COVID, the concept of the con artist has risen by 1,000%. As I wrote this, I'm sad now. Did you notice Data's face while he was playing the judge? He was smiling a little too much. Maybe David Karen missed that when he was editing the episode. I was in the hospital going for an x-ray once, and I received a phone call. My first thought was why I'm ringing myself, as the number on my mobile was similar to my own number, and of course it was a scam. So my rating is 7 new scams I have noticed within the last 5 years. Someone should tell Riker that Picard has a thing for his future wife Deanna, out of 10. My rating for The Wounded, 10, another why Chief O'Brien hates the Kardashians, and was this the start of the Maquis within Starfleet, out of 10. I watched the review of Preemptive Strike on the Penske File. No spoilers on my comment. However, I will be more negative on the episode than West was. Oh, boo. I love Preemptive Strike. But, you know, that's okay. Your opinions. And, of course, Steven is giving his opinion on The Wounded because I had already reviewed that episode a couple years ago. So, not taking comments. Unfortunately, episodes I've already reviewed, I don't take comments on because I've already made the video and I do a revisited, but I don't take comments on revisited because those are just for my Patreon supporters anyway. Yeah, and just to be clear, Steven did write Kardashians and not Cardassians. That joke never gets old, except it kind of does. Anyway, next comment is from Antarius, who says, it feels like a bit of a sequel to Who Watches the Watchers, but this time it's about the non-existence of the devil. The mystery is well constructed, although Ardra is powerful beyond belief. Why is there a science expedition when the people neither have warp technology nor even want the technology? The Prime Directive should apply here. Further questions: why does Picard sleep with big flowers hanging above his pillow? And why is Data the logical choice as a shuttle pilot? I really like the matte painting of the surface. My rating is a 7 out of 10. Well, I can answer the question of why Data is the best choice for a shuttle pilot. So, because the episode wanted him down on the planet. The writer, because I wrote it that way. As far as wouldn't the Prime Directive apply? Actually, the answer is no. The Prime Directive doesn't apply because, as was mentioned in this episode, the Ventaxians actually have contact with interstellar species. They've already met the Klingons. That was, in fact, a major plot point, that because there was aliens and this dispute involving aliens, they decided to create laws having arbitrations dealing with off-worlders. So it's actually implied that they have a lot of interactions with off-worlders. So they may not have warp technology. They didn't state it otherwise. One would assume that they don't, because they mentioned that they stagnated their technology. But it's clear that they do interstellar trade. Well, I don't know. They didn't specifically make trade, so I'm bringing that one up myself. But they did make it clear that they have regular contact with off-worlders. And so since they do, Prime Directive doesn't apply. I mean, these aliens are advanced. In fact, that was even a plot point in Insurrection, where Picard was like, oh, you're violating the Prime Directive. But the Admiral says, well, actually, the Baku are super advanced. They just choose to live a simpler life. So they're aware of interstellar travel, so the Prime Directive doesn't apply. Same thing here. Anyway. Next comment is from Anthony D. Benedictus, who says, first and foremost, my rewatch of this made me realize I enjoyed this episode better than I remember. Interestingly, when I went to search for it, I was combing through season 2, confused that I could not find it. I was surprised to find it in season 4. I believe this is at least partly because the themes and plot of this episode are quite TOS, while the execution is more TNG Golden Age. Data, who ends up being the arbiter, uses performance to create awareness and understand humanity better. Opening scene, Picard notes that by ceasing to imitate other actors, he gets closer to humanity. Audra, in contrast, uses performance to manipulate people's emotions. She does imitate established mythical figures, which in a sense are other actors. Overall, this episode is well paced and shows that with the proper execution, you can take an episode that has a plot and themes more in line with TOS and give it the depth that we associate with the TNG Golden Age. As for Audra, I didn't exactly dislike the actress nor her portrayal of the character, but I feel like they didn't quite nail it. That said, playing the villain in a way that entertains, intrigues, and satisfies an audience is a difficult thing to do. It requires a real character actor. Yeah, those are excellent points, especially pointing out the themes with the Scrooge thing and how, or like the method acting they talked about at the start of the episode, how Picard warns Data not to imitate other actors, but this is exactly what Audra is doing. That's actually a good point. And the whole thing, I do think the Scrooge thing at the start actually ties into the episode nicely, better than the Henry V thing and the Defector, which was just, I mean, they tried to tie it in by having Picard quote it later on, but it didn't really tie in that strongly. But I think this one, it gets to the root of people's fears controlling them and how people can use fear in order to manipulate other people. I think that worked out, nicely. So, anyway, thank you very much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Devil's Due out of 10 is going to be a 7, very good. Not going as high as an 8 or a 9. In fact, I was thinking of giving this episode a 6, but that's just the part of me that's still sick of this episode. I agree that Audra, I didn't really quite like the way she was portrayed. I think her obsessing over Picard and being like sexually, obsessed with him and constantly trying to control him didn't seem to ring true to me. Something about it just, I don't know, didn't quite fit with her being kind of felt a bit artificial. But there's like, I love the concept of it. As I said, it does seem like an original series concept, but it was executed in a very TNG way. And so that's very fitting to the TNG characters. And so I think it was an interesting concept, and it was interesting to see TNG tackle a concept like this, but be true to the show that it is. And it leads to some very, satisfying moments when Picard shows off and steals her powers and imitates. Like that was a very satisfying moment to watch. But there's a lot of nitpicks here and there, as Norman Buckwald pointed out, and more than that, I feel like, I don't know. It's not just the nitpicks or the plot holes. It's just at times I don't think her Audra's behavior really worked for the episode. So that's why I'm not giving it higher than a 7. But I think this episode is good enough for at least a 7. Even though in the past I used to think of this episode a lot worse, but that was because I was so sick of it, which I'm not anymore. So yeah, and judging it on its own merits, I'll give it a 7 out of 10. So that is it for my review of Devil's Due. So coming up next on my channel, if I can find it here, tomorrow, hopefully, will be my review of Discovery, Season 5, Episode 3. On Saturday, I'll be over on Patreon for another this time revisiting my review for Clues, which will be an interesting one to cover. And then on Monday, I'll be back here on my main channel, my main channel, for a new review for First Contact, the episode, not the movie, not Star Trek First Contact, but I'm in the 4th season, so it's a 4th season episode, First Contact. It's kind of frustrating how they use the same title of a movie in the episode, so I have to specify this now. Anyway, that's what's coming up on my channel, so be sure to check it out as I continue to cover Star Trek and many more shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.